September 2015, Hagerstown, Maryland. Before 2015, Aiden never would have guessed that anything that spread online would do any real harm outside of toxic political views and a bit of cyberbullying. There was nothing to be truly afraid of on the internet, except for what people brought to it. That is what Aiden used to believe. Everything changed in 2015. In 2015, a darkness that had been sleeping was starting to wake up. Unlike most of his friends who were attending out-of-state universities, Aiden was taking classes at Hagerstown Community College. His classes all related to the two things that fascinated him most: computer science and psychology. He hoped to someday build a small business that offered consulting to AI developers on how best to build human-like characteristics into computer consciousness. One of his philosophies was that what made the human mind so special was related to what maintained its attention. He would often note that humans only consciously remember a tiny fraction of the total data that's collected, and that the one who understood the criteria for what made the portion of data memorable would unlock the human mind in profound ways. Aiden's studies helped him understand at least the basics of these topics. Although he found his classes interesting, continuing to live at home with his father and sister felt stagnant and dreary, despite the old man's recent efforts to spend time with them, as though one could reimburse a lifetime of neglect with a few months of quality time. Aiden did, however, enjoy spending more time with his kid sister, who was now in 8th grade. Aiden and Kelsey understood each other better now than they had in more turbulent years past. Their mother had run away to the Midwest when Aiden was 11, without so much as saying goodbye. Aiden's father had simply said that she went crazy and joined some religious cult on a commune out in Indiana. All attempts to contact her had failed. Aiden and Kelsey's father was an executive for a company that managed mining facilities all over the world. He was currently in rural China, inspecting some relatively new mine that his firm had bought. He had told Aiden that he would be back in 9 days. It had now been about a week. Outside of classes, Aiden filled his days primarily with computer games, MOBA-style real-time strategy games like League of Legends and Heroes of the Storm, as well as online board games. Every Thursday, Aiden would Skype with his friend Jeff while playing a game or two of chess online. Jeff attended Longwood University in Virginia, and like Aiden, was not particularly good at making friends. Aiden was scrawny and wan-looking, despite his piercing eyes that revealed a sharp intellect. He was still an agile runner from years of track, a hobby that he had abandoned the previous year. Unfortunately, he suffered from a misanthropic demeanor. Aiden and Jeff had this much in common. A budding hobby, almost passion of Aiden's, was creating memes, specifically macro images of the sort that bombard social media platforms like Facebook and Tumblr on the daily. He enjoyed the charm and humor of them when they were well crafted, but what was most interesting to Aiden was their potentially viral nature. The very definition of meme has to do with an idea that spreads, perhaps mutating here and there, but essentially repeating itself. It was the psychology of the meme, the psychology of the mind virus, as he thought of it, that made certain ideas, images, or words so enticing. It's about discovering what makes some ideas stick while others fade into the background, Aiden explained over Skype to Jeff as he moved his digital queenside knight. It's about cracking the formula for what our subconscious intelligence actually finds important and is urged to repeat. I get it, said Jeff, stroking his chin as he considered his next move. You've been channeling pop psychology crap like Malcolm Gladwell for a while, but I don't know. I don't know how long it would take until you'd actually find it useful as part of a consulting business. My advice? May as well stick to coding. Muttered Aiden. It's not just Gladwell, Jeff. Think of how much raw information we don't find interesting enough to remember, let alone repeat. There are quantifiable elements and formulas at work. I'm sure of it. So what? Said Jeff. Are you just gonna study memes all the time? It's not just memes in the way you're thinking, like macro images. It's everything that spreads. I'm subscribed to threads, RSS feeds, forums, and Facebook groups that are all about sharing top memes, chain letters, and everything else that goes viral. I'm analyzing their commonalities and differences. Bravo, said Jeff. Aiden saw him clap sarcastically over Skype's video stream. We've got a real Isaac Newton over here. Shut up, laughed Jeff, cracking his knuckles. By the way, you're in checkmate. The autumn waned on, and Aiden continued his studies both for his classes and for his meme obsession. It was now approaching midnight on November 1st, when Viral Releaser, Aiden's favorite meme-based email list that he was subscribed to, sent him something strange. It was a short story. The story itself was in the body of the email. There was no attachment, no link to a blog, website, or any kind of citation. The email's subject line was simply, "Share and survive." He happened to be checking his email as soon as it landed in his inbox, and on a whim, decided to open it right away. Usually he received macro images, GIFs, Vine-style videos, and the like. But this time, it was a short story. Aiden copied it in its entirety to a document in his Google Drive. All of the subject line of the email was "Share and Survive." The title of the story itself sat plainly at the top of the body of the email, underlined and written in the same plain, sans serif font. The Lord of the Golden Castle. At first, it sounded like generic fantasy, just boilerplate fiction, hardly the sort of stuff that gets shared, let alone goes viral. It was somewhat interesting to Aiden that the prose had an old-fashioned, quasi-historical, and sometimes reverent nature to it, almost like an updated version of the King James Bible. Usually, viral aggregators like the Viral Release email list he subscribed to would include explanations, commentary, or some kind of background about the meme or media that was going viral. It's possible that Viral Releaser had some kind of issue with their website. For some reason, when their website crashed, it would occasionally mess up some of the content. Aiden ruefully realized that the hub would have become more popular if it didn't have so many crashes and errors. Aiden turned back to the story itself. It was already late in the evening, but he decided to continue reading the nebulous text that was written in a style that seemed to insist the whole thing was non-fiction. The Lord of the Golden Castle. Aiden said the title aloud before starting from the beginning once more. He read with mild interest at first. A bemused smile was on his face as the laptop screen beamed on him in the otherwise dark room. Slowly, his eyes widened as curiosity became disgust and eventually horror. Aiden felt his lips curl in revulsion, yet he could not look away. From start to finish, the entire narrative took him only a couple hours to read. When he was finished, he closed his laptop and sat in the dark. He kept reading the story in his head over and over again. The words had burned into his mind. He heard them sub-vocalized in his own voice. He felt cold and experienced a vague, generalized anxiety in the back of his mind that was growing rather than diminishing as the minutes passed, like a whisper, becoming louder. The story itself was repulsive, occasionally contradictory, and barely coherent. It was unclear what was meant to be figurative, what was an aside, and in many cases, what was even being described. As Aiden understood it, it seemed to tell of a mighty king who ruled a race of humanoid demons known as the Yellow Crawlers, who had taken physical form and lived in a complex network of tunnels and caverns underneath the ground of what would eventually be Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and some surrounding areas. The story described how these creatures were granted the ability to slither from the abyss of another dimension into the physical world through the power of the Lord of the Golden Castle, sometimes called the King in Yellow, or the King of the Golden Crawlers, who was an enigmatic figure. It was unclear if he was supposed to be, or by reputation, had simply been mistaken for another character from legend and folklore, also referred to as the King in Yellow. He stood taller than the length of two men head to toe, and wore a yellow cloak that always shrouded his face in total darkness. The Lord of the Golden Castle would also telepathically call to humans who lived on the land above their cavernous kingdom. Aiden inferred that they were European settlers and Native Americans based on clues related to the setting, although the tale did not use such labels to describe them. Many others were simply snatched up and dragged below, where they would be imprisoned in dungeons and tortured using twisted and macabre machines that the Yellow Crawlers had built. The humans who were not tortured and devoured would be placed into something called the Womb. Aiden could not tell if the womb referred to a room, a machine, or something else, but it would somehow transform them. The Yellow Crawlers lived by eating natural vegetation that grew in and around the hidden openings to their kingdom. They also ate fish from underground lakes and ponds that they maintained in their caverns. The Lord of the Golden Castle would pass these captive humans to different clusters of Yellow Crawlers as playthings to be tortured and mutilated for the amusement of his followers. The story said that what his servants did not realize at first was that the pain, fear, and despair of these captured humans is what sustained the King in Yellow. His power grew from their agony and distress, and so he endeavored to ensure that each batch of men, women, and children he captured lived for as long as possible before his hideous serfs were done with them and at last devoured them, or sent them into the womb. For decades, this continued until a legion of brave warriors came from above, seeking vengeance and the head of the King in Yellow. They were fighters both native to North America and those of European descent, who had finally cleansed out the filthy halls and caves of the Yellow Crawlers. They laid siege against the so-called Golden Castle and fought against the King in Yellow. They used bow and arrow, torches, swords, and spears. Based on descriptions in the story, it sounded like some of them used muskets or rifles, but the story did not use such terms. The Golden King fought back with his bare hands, even after most of his subjects were killed. He was able to rip most of the human's skin off with a single pull, and unseen teeth under the dark of his hood would bite into a warrior's neck, cutting the head clean off. The humans fought this abomination until they finally subdued him. They stabbed him dozens of times before cutting his unspeakably horrific body parts into tiny pieces and burning them each individually. The pieces of the Yellow King did not stop twitching and wriggling until they were practically ash. The story spoke of how the Golden King's rotting heart continued to beat even as it was removed from his giant chest. Only after the heart itself was stabbed twice more did it finally relinquish, and as his evil spirit faded from this dimension, he spoke in a voice that could have been a roar or a screech.
As long as humans can be made to dread me, I will find a way to return.
The stench of the King in Yellow's burning flesh was so terrible that some onlookers became sick for days. 4 of the warriors who were uninjured from the fight died from infection a few days later, leaving yellowed corpses behind. This marked the end of what the story referred to as the War of Pus, since the yellow crawlers seemed to only spill yellowish-white pus instead of red blood. Before describing the King in Yellow's demise, the story rambled on, almost poetically. In gruesome detail, it described acts that made Aiden's skin crawl and his stomach churn, despite the fact that he had seen more than his fair share of gory horror movies. This felt different. The descriptions of torment, mutilation, and grotesque perversions surrounding the Lord of the Golden Castle and his King of Yellow Crawlers were horrifying in ways that went beyond what pulp novelists would use for mere lurid shock. This was simply not okay, Aiden thought, not just about the events described in the story, but also about the fact that they had been written at all. Only the imagination of someone truly disturbed could have elaborated so eloquently on the imagery contained in the tale that was already burning into Aiden's brain like a brand. The more unspeakable scenes that were described were written in a tone that almost sounded gleeful or even deferential. He could not shake the detailed descriptions of the yellow crawlers from his mind, especially their empty, black sockets where eyes should have been, or how they would have carved off the skin around their teeth and lips, so they always appeared to have large, ghoulish smiles on their skull. Aiden continued reading. The story said that after the so-called War of Pus, a pact to never speak of it again was made between the surviving warriors of the final battle against the Lord of the Golden Castle, and everyone else who knew of it. They swore to destroy all written documents and to punish anyone who suggested that such a war had ever been fought. It was believed that the Lord of the Golden Castle gained his strength from humans fearing him. Village elders and wise men said that the best way to prevent this demon king from returning was to never speak of him, and to ensure that no one knew of his power, his voice, his cruelty, or the kingdom of horrors he had built beneath the earth. They had deduced that knowledge of, understanding of, and especially fear of the King in Yellow is what gave him strength and risked allowing him to return. Even a story of a story was too risky, as it implanted some level of understanding in the reader. The entrances to those old caverns were sealed with rock and soil and disguised by the planting of trees and bushes. But the long, empty spaces where evil things had lurked were still there, waiting to be filled once more. Of course, this was merely Aiden's interpretation and understanding of the story. The tale was written in such a strange and bizarre way, as though it was told by someone who learned plain modern American English as a second language and understood it perfectly, but scorned it and mocked proper usage of it. The final paragraph of the story was what disturbed Aiden the most, despite being the most easily understandable portion. He committed it to memory. It said, "Let all who have read or heard this account understand that it is true in totality. Understand that this document was not first written by human hands. Understand that because you know the story, an hourglass has been placed upon your head. You will have only some days and some hours before those of your close kin fall into pain and death, one by one. The only way to prevent this pestilence is to share this story or kill your kin. You must copy it, show it to others, and have them read it in full. Then the curse will be passed to those you show it to, and transformation of your kindred may be prevented. Share the story, save your family, survive the curse. It matters not whether the reader believes the story, as long as they understand its meaning. The curse will be passed either way. As the knowledge of this story spreads, so too will our king become stronger, until he is strong enough to puncture a hole back into the corporal dimension, from which we will spill forth once more. Go now, repeat this story to others, and survive in your current form. Keep it to yourself, and the spirit of the Lord of the Golden Castle will come into your dwelling place and touch each of your kin with his long fingers, one by one, before finally coming to touch you. Save your kin, save yourself, share and survive. But either way, understand that because you have read this much, you will serve his purpose in the end. It was truly this final paragraph that bothered Aiden the most, despite everything else that was packed into the gratuitously disturbing story. Aiden hated what he thought of as chain letter style crap. This kind of nonsense was common in the 90s and early 2000s, and he supposed that such trickery had never really gone away, as he could easily think of other examples. Share this post to stop the bad luck. Type Amen in the comments and Jesus will bless you with wealth. Send this email to 6 friends and you'll be blessed by angels. The instances Aiden could think of went on and on. To him, this was the most annoyingly bottom-of-the-barrel way for an idea to spread. It cynically played to people's sense of self-preservation in a transparently craven way. As someone who studied both the psychology of how certain ideas could repeat themselves, as well as the power of the internet to spread ideas in ways that would have been unfathomably fast only decades ago, there was nothing more contemptible than some loser exploiting this glitch of human nature to make something spread, especially in the case of a random, grotesque story, the likes of which Aiden had just read. The next evening, Aiden ate pasta at their dining room table with his curly-haired sister, Kelsey, who slurped her spaghetti and made a familiar sound that Aiden found incredibly irritating. "Oh yeah," blurted Kelsey with her mouth full. "Dad called. He said he got real sick to his stomach on his trip. He's not gonna fly for at least a few more days." "When did he call?" asked Aiden. "It was earlier today. Don't worry, his voice sounded a little funny, but he sounded okay. Probably just a stomach bug." "How did his voice sound funny?" "I don't know. He just sounded sick, kind of froggy. But sort of weirdly happy, too. Maybe everything went good with the mine." Several days more passed, and Aiden could not shake an uneasy feeling of dread, like a shadow that followed him, only to vanish when he turned his head. He felt it at the Hagerstown Community College campus. He felt it as he walked out of a McDonald's. Something about the way the clouds had formed and moved the last several days disturbed him and made the hair on his arms stand up. They seemed to froth and move with preternatural speed. Yet there were no winds about the clouds, no wind where he stood. Despite being as black as storm clouds, no rain or lightning could be seen, just quickly morphing and congealing black fume like ink in water. It was now the 3rd day in a row that such eerie clouds seemed to dominate the sky every time Aiden stepped outside. "The Lord of the Golden Castle," he said out loud. He wasn't sure why he said it, but the words left his lips naturally. He was standing at a crosswalk, waiting for the signal on his way back home. He shook his head as if trying to wake himself from his stupor. "Placebo effect, man," he said to himself. "Gotta get hold of myself. Been spending too much time on my own." He had the instinct to look over his shoulder as he traversed the crosswalk, and there he saw a broad figure in a yellow cloak walking in his direction along the crosswalk. The cluster of people also crossing did not seem to notice the cloaked figure or care, despite the fact that his face was concealed by the eerie, heavy hood of his yellow cloak. His face was completely shrouded in darkness, as though midnight surrounded only him. Aiden began to walk faster down the streets of Hagerstown, and the cloaked figure followed him, until he came into a well-populated street corner. Under the shroud of the heavy clouds, Aiden felt his fear suddenly turn to anger, and he spun around and walked up to the yellow-clad figure who now towered over him. Aiden jutted out his finger, barely an inch away from the cloaked menace. "Stay away from me, you understand, creep?" Aiden screamed, his face turning red.
We crawl, we crawl, we crawl and crawl, and crawl and crawl.
He heard a whisper, but it didn't seem to come from the man in front of him. He felt it inside his head, as if he was wearing headphones.
We crawl into your mind. We crawl into your mind. We crawl into your thoughts. We crawl from the ground. We crawl into your family. Crawl. We crawl. We crawl. We crawl.
"Shut up!" screamed Aiden. "Stop!" He put the palms of his hands over his ears and squeezed his eyes closed. "I think you need to lay off the drugs," Aiden heard a different voice say. He opened his eyes and saw that the tall, cloaked figure that he had seen in front of him was gone, and instead there was an annoyed-looking, middle-aged man wearing a blue suit. "Try that again and I'll call the cops, punk." The man bashed into Aiden's shoulder with contempt as he walked past, and he fell to his knees, shivering. "What is happening to me?" Aiden muttered. "I'm telling you, man," Aiden heard his friend Jeff say over Skype. "This is what happens when you don't get enough sleep and you only drink soda. It's the sodium and all the crap they put in there. Do you even know what high fructose corn syrup is?" "Jeff, shut up. I don't care about high fructose corn syrup." They were making eye contact as they spoke over their webcams this time, rather than the usual habit of multitasking alongside a game. Aiden had told Jeff all about the story, but he left out the last paragraph about sharing and surviving. "Look, people hallucinate all the time when they're stressed." "It didn't feel like a hallucination, Jeff." "Well, if you've never had a hallucination before, like you said, then how would you know what they feel like?" "Touché," Aiden laughed. "I actually really hope this was a hallucination." "Well," said Jeff, waving his arms as he spoke, "listen to me, Aiden. It's just a story. Stories don't hurt people. Stories like this aren't real. You don't gotta be looking over your shoulder." "I know," said Aiden. "I know it's crazy." The two exchanged farewells, and Aiden closed his laptop with a sigh. Maybe a graphic novel or something light would help. He also noted that it was about dinner time, and he heard Kelsey's voice. "Dad's home!" Aiden wasn't usually this excited to see the old man, but he ran downstairs, still more child than adult, and gave his father a hug. The gray-bearded man was pretty chipper considering he had gotten sick before his long flight home. "Glad to see you two didn't burn down the place," he chirped, pointing at himself. "Looks like our Chinese friends were a real fan of Dr. Stevens' leadership, so now I've earned an evening off." They ordered pizza and ate together in the family room as Kelsey browsed through Netflix. Aiden's dad seemed to be doing well, but there was something off about him that Aiden couldn't quite figure out. Perhaps it was the dry skin from all the air travel, or maybe it was just jet lag. But Aiden could have sworn that there was a slight, sickly hue to his skin that wasn't there before. "So, Dad," said Aiden, "you seem to be feeling better?" "Yeah," Dr. Stevens responded, unpacking a briefcase. "Stomach still hurts a bit, and I felt weirdly itchy for a while. Should have used lotion, but whatever. I don't usually catch something so nasty when I travel, but, immune system's age too." The next day, it was clear to Aiden that their dad had given the bug to Kelsey. Aiden came home from classes to find her lying in bed with a fever. Like her dad, she kept complaining about itchiness. Their father was already asleep in his own room. He had been especially tired since his trip. "I better not catch it," Aiden thought. There was a sudden scream, like a cry of anguish. It sounded like their dad. Aiden barged through the door to find him lying on the ground. His skin and eyes were completely yellow. "Oh my God," Aiden said. Dad! Dad!" Aiden kneeled over his father and snapped his fingers, Despite his yellow eyes being wide open, the stricken man did not respond. Aiden had seen this in textbooks. This was surely jaundice. Aiden knew it. He needed to get his father to a hospital. He needed to get to an ambulance quickly. He frantically fished for his mobile phone. An icy hand grabbed his wrist with terrifying strength. His father glanced at him now, with dark, yellow eyes. Then Aiden's father spoke, and his voice sounded at once familiar and alien. It bellowed with an otherworldly malice. "You're too late, son. The king of the Golden Castle will return." The once gentle giant that was Aiden's father lurched up and began to overpower Aiden. He felt the cold, yellow hands of his parent on his neck, squeezing painfully. It took only seconds for his vision to begin to darken. With desperate gasps, Aiden angled himself to reach his father's face and began punching him in the forehead, each blow powered by adrenaline. One final punch to the temple, and Dr. Stevens' deathly grip on his throat finally let up, with an angry cry of anguish. Kicking and pushing his father off of him, Aiden squirmed to a standing position and staggered once he ran out the bedroom door and downstairs towards the basement. He heard the heavy footsteps of his father chasing after him. He made his way into the cold, unfinished basement and slammed the door behind him. Their basement served as more of a warehouse or shed than it did an extra room. Aiden squinted in the dark as he tried to look around frantically. Only moments later, the tall, middle-aged man trudged down the stairs to the first floor and grunted demonically before opening the doors of the basement that Aiden had slammed behind him. He seemed to snarl and made a noise as if he was sniffing the air. Then he switched on the dim lights and scanned the room. "Son!" the gray-haired man called out, his yellow eyes bulging. "Son! Aiden, you are making this more painful than it needs to be. When our hearts stop, we will not die. We will become reborn as his subjects. We will be his favored servants. We will live forever in his resurrected golden kingdom." The creature who had once been Dr. Stevens paused and listened before speaking again. It seemed he was certain that Aiden was hiding somewhere down there. "I will make it up to you all the time I squandered. We will spend eternity together." He stopped and sniffed the air again. By the look on his yellow face, it seemed he was trying to locate the exact source of the odor he followed. "Son, the story you read was written by one of the yellow crawlers. I can hear their thoughts now. Our minds connect. My transformation has begun. And before it finishes, your sister will begin to change as well." He paused once more, but did not stop searching the room. He stalked carefully like a predator on the hunt. "Aiden, we will find your mother. Aiden, she will become one with us. We will all be together again as chosen subjects in the Golden King's great family. You won't feel lonely again." What was once Aiden's father appeared even more yellow than before, even in the dim fluorescent light. It looked as though a narrow stream of yellowish white pus had begun to dribble from his eyes and the corners of his mouth. His back also appeared more hunched and curved than it had been naturally. He lurched over to a wooden workbench where one of two large toolboxes had been left open. Slowly, but without hesitation, he reached into the toolbox and found a small crowbar. "Son," Aiden's father said, this time more gently holding the crowbar. "Don't you see? This will make the transformation go easier. I never told you how proud I am of you. Let me help you, my child." In a flash, Aiden leapt out from behind the shelving unit where he was hiding and swung a rubber mallet with both hands at his father's skull. With a painful thud, the yellow creature's neck jerked at the impact, and he fell to the concrete floor. Aiden was crying and panting. He dropped the mallet, and put his ear on his father's chest, and then neck. His yellow skin was cold and scaly, but he was breathing. His heart was beating. Aiden scrambled over to the open toolbox and dug until he found a roll of duct tape, which he immediately started using to bind his unconscious father, limb to limb. Aiden left what was once his dad lying on the basement floor, bound completely in industrial-grade duct tape, except for his head. The creature slept silently. Upstairs, Aiden found his sister still lying in bed. She was coughing, but it didn't seem to wake her. Her skin had become extremely yellow. Aiden went into his own room. His fingers were shaking, and all his movements were frenetic. He opened his laptop. Damn it, Aiden thought. Jeff wasn't on Skype. No one was. He grabbed his phone from his pocket and called Jeff. It rang with no answer. He called again and heard the line ring twice more before a sleepy-sounding Jeff finally picked up. Dude, what do you want? Jeff's breathy voice said. Jeff, listen to me. What the hell, man? I told you earlier that tomorrow is when I got that big exam, like super early. Jeff, shut up and listen to me. I need you to get on Skype. I need you to read the story. I need you to say the whole thing to me so I know that you've read all of it. What is this about, man? I'll explain later, said Aiden. Just get on your computer. Get on your computer right now. Aiden surprised himself that he managed to persuade his friend. But eventually, he was able to coerce Jeff into reading the entire story, but not before copying it and sharing it several times for good measure. Aiden wanted to take no chances regarding what this nightmarish curse, or whoever caused it, considered to be sharing. With his throat in his chest, he posted the story to his own website as well. Can't take any chances. A week had passed since the night when Aiden compelled his best friend to read the hideous tale out loud. It was only after he finished reading it that Aiden told Jeff what had happened and convinced him that it was all true. Jeff broke off contact with him and blocked Aiden's phone number, his Skype name, and every other means Aiden had to reach him. Aiden's father remembered nothing upon waking up from the basement floor. The duct tape had been removed while he was still asleep. Aiden had trusted that the absence of yellow in his skin and eyes was proof enough that the curse had been passed on. Aiden was grateful that his sister was better too. Kelsey did not remember much except beginning to feel better from her fever, and waking up to see her brother run through the door and hug her for what seemed like an eternity. As the days had passed, she did not seem to have any lingering effects from the beginning of their unnatural sickness. However, even as weeks more passed, Aiden would sometimes think that their father would look at them strangely, every now and again, and a hint of yellow would flicker in his eyes. The moments always seemed to go by without incident, and he couldn't be sure if it was perhaps just his own imagination. What he did know for sure was that, unlike Kelsey, their father had gone through the entire fever, and at least for a while, had been changed. What this meant for the future, Aiden could not say. Whether it was just a memory of the terror he felt, or it was a whisper calling to him telepathically, Aiden did not know. But on occasion, he heard the voice of the Lord of the Golden Castle in his mind. It was like a far-off echo, a tickle in his brain. He could not make out the words, but he knew that every day he lived, his fear of the horrible Demon King's return was growing, and with it, the world was stepping closer to the return of the King in Yellow, the return of the Lord of the Golden Castle. In his heart, Aiden knew that the next generation of subjects were being spawned and would soon resurrect that evil kingdom. Aiden had helped make it happen. He had helped make it inevitable. He had shared the story. He had survived. One day, Aiden sat in his room and suddenly heard a deep and terrible voice. that came from over his shoulder. It spoke in a tone that was sardonic, mocking, and cruel.
It's just a story. Stories don't hurt people.
He spun his head around, but no one was there. But Aiden knew that no matter where he went, he would never again be alone.